My name is Ryan, Shelton City Manager. We also have Mayor Gary Cross, Commissioner Kathy McDowell. We expect that Commissioner Tracy Moore will join us as well. We also have some staff that run the operations for local water and sewer. Craig Gregory, Public Works Director, Brent Armstrong, who is the sewer lead, and then Brian Dovey is the water lead. We'll also have finance staff on hand as well. We're going to get started quickly, and Courtney Black can step up and walk through the rate study update. Before we do that, we thought we'd recap a little bit about where we are in terms of rates. So we went back to 2007 and put down some approximate monthly bills.
Can we close that door?
We're going to have to leave it open so you can come in.
Sorry.
So you can see over the last 11 years, we've increased about 35% in terms of the average monthly bill. And then we dropped in some of the infrastructure that had been done in the water department. So you have a little over $10 million since 2007 that has been put in terms of infrastructure. And then the same in sewer. So this has actually gone up, it's doubled, gone up at 114% since 2007. And during that time, the city has put in $55 million of sewer infrastructure. So just a quick recap about what's there. Courtney Black from FCS Group is going to run through the sewer and water rate model update, and then we have, obviously, she's on hand to answer questions, commissioners are here, and then if there are any operational questions about water and sewer, we have those folks on hand as well. With that, we'll give it over to Courtney.
Okay.
You can't shut it, Ken.
Can't shut it. Gotta stay open. So we also are going to begin with some introduction and background as far as FCS Group's history with working with the city on utility rates. In 2015 was our last touch on the sewer rate forecast. At that time, staff was internally using a sewer model we prepared for them in 2013 during a study to update. Apparently it was a useful internal tool, and we just spent some time helping them verify their results and review them for rate setting. In 2010 is when we last performed a water rate study. So in 2017, current year, the city was on track for a water plan that included 4% annual rate increases through 2018, but this year suspended the rate plan and did not increase rates for water or sewer. The sewer plan was tracking at 5% annually for rate increases through 2020 based on the last update, and again in 2017 both of those rate increase plans were suspended and there was no rate increase in the current year. So looking at rates again at this time, the city's begun to secure funding sources for a significant sewer capital project, the Basin 3 Rehabilitation Project. And so this was a good time as that's starting to fall into place as it's in the near term to look at what that funding picture looks like and what that will mean to rates. It's important to note that there are other basin rehabilitation projects that are not included in the funding picture here because the city's been very successful at getting low-cost funding for the current rehabilitation project. They want to be able to execute that for future projects as well to the best that they can. So we're updating the water and sewer rate forecasts 2018 through 2023. So the foundation of the study, the data we're using and the forecast assumptions are here. So operating costs, those are costs that are not building or replacing facilities. Those are the year-to-year staff, billing costs, maintenance, customer service, meter reading, things that happen year-to-year and need to be funded by rates. That's from your 2017 budget. Beginning fund balances, so that's your reserves. That's as of year-end 2016, so we start looking in 2017. Then capital expenditures, so that's building or replacing your infrastructure. We keep that distinct from operating costs because there are restrictions on what funds are available for capital versus operating. And then revenue, this is from your 2017 budget as well. So in forecasting that financial basis, that financial data forward, general cost inflation, that's based on consumer price index, a 10-year average at 1.5%. Wages and benefits, employment cost index, again an average, 2.5% for wages, 4% for benefits. And then capital expenditures, again, because those are distinct and separately tracked and funded, There's a construction-specific index, the ENR Construction Cost Index, again, a 10-year average, and that tends to be higher than general cost inflation. It's at 3%. And then in terms of customer base growth, without those rehabilitation basin projects, you wouldn't have capacity to serve much more growth. So conservatively, we've said we're not projecting customer growth that would show higher revenue than you might get. So managing a utility happens around the framework of good financial policies. These are the policies that this rate study observes in setting rates and forecasting. So the operating reserve, and I'll give you the fancy accounting speak and then what that means. It says under purpose there, it's a liquidity cushion to accommodate cyclical cash flow fluctuations. All that means is your revenue and expenditures don't come in evenly all year, and you want to ensure that if expenses are a little ahead in timing, you have enough in the fund. What that means is for water, that at the beginning of the year, you'll start with about 2 months, 60 days, as a minimum of your operating costs. And so you could fund 2 months of expenses if there was a delay in receiving revenue or an early expense. Sewer, that's 45 days. Those are industry standards. Sewer revenues tend to be more stable, less variable than water revenues, so it's a little bit lower target. A capital contingency reserve. As you know, a contingency is a backup plan. So if you have emergency repairs, cost overruns, things that are unexpected, you have a little bit of reserve towards that. And that's just a little 1% of your capital asset value that remains in reserve for that purpose. Rate-funded system reinvestment, kind of a mouthful. All that means, and we're going to come back to this on another slide, is that each year your rates fund enough to create a little savings towards repair and replacement of projects, repair and replacement of facilities in your system. So they're all moving toward eventual replacement. If you are not setting anything aside, you are relying 100% on borrowing for repair and replacement. So this policy says we will set something aside, recognizing that assets age. The policy target, and again, we'll spend a little more time on a separate slide, annual depreciation less any principal debt payments you're making. Debt service coverage, another one that we'll dig into a little further, but it's part of this framework, is that you'll remain in compliance with existing debt covenants and maintain your creditworthiness for future borrowing. So you have existing debt covenants that the bondholders say you must do X, Y, Z since we lent you money, that we'll talk about a little bit more what that is. So the target is that you will meet 2.0, we'll talk about that factor, or your existing debt says your minimum is 1.3 to not violate the existing covenants. Rate setting, it's important to have a multi-year financial plan. There are variable things year to year in utilities, and you want to ensure that you don't run into a funding wall. So you take at least a 6-year look is what we're doing. And then revenue sufficiency, it feels like stating the obvious, but it's important to as a policy, want to stick to setting rates to meet your total annual financial obligation and be self-supporting in your utility. So rates would be set to cover, and we'll be looking at this, your operating costs, those ongoing non-project related costs, debt repayment, that rate-funded system reinvestment savings, and attainment of fiscal policies, essentially what we've just defined here. So rate-funded system reinvestment, we're going to spend 2 slides talking about what this is because it's very important, but it's a bit conceptual. So it's a consistent cash amount from your current rates, and it's to pay for, as I noted, repairs and replacements. That's short language, R&R, for your repairs and your replacements of facilities in the system. It's saved in a fund to pay for future capital projects or the current ones. It's policy-based and budgeted, and so it's prioritized, it's formalized in utility policy so that you ensure you follow through. And it reduces reliance on borrowing to fund repair and replacements. Again, if you're not setting anything aside, you're guaranteed to borrow every time you need to replace something. So there are some alternative funding targets. These are just sort of industry targets that are used. The top one's the one that, as of the last rate study, we had in place for you. And that's that each year you'd set aside an amount equal to the depreciation of your assets for that year, less any principal payment on loans. So depreciation is just the measure of 1 year of use of that asset. So if it's a 50-year life of an asset, it's 1/50th of the cost that you set aside for when it's replaced. So the second one is just doing full depreciation and not reducing by the debt principal. And the final one, which very few utilities are doing, but it's along the movement along that spectrum. Some utilities are setting aside each year enough so they ensure they will 100% cash fund repair and replacements. So they still might borrow for when they're required to, state requires something that they upgrade, or there's an expansion to serve new growth, maybe they borrow, but for repair and replacement, they say we're not going to borrow. So a picture is helpful, and then we'll move on from this concept. This is just a sample. It's not a real pipe. It's just to help the concept understanding. So our pipe has a 50-year useful life. You can see year 1 on the left, year 50 on the right-hand side. And we're testing 3 different parts of that life. Year 1, year 25, and then when it needs a replacement. And so we said this pipe originally cost the utility $50,000 to put in the ground. After 50 years, with inflation at 3%, that's our assumption, capital cost inflation, the replacement of that pipe is about $220,000. If you were to do the depreciation, I got a pointer here, let's use that. If you were to adopt the depreciation policy, so that says 1,000 is 1 year of the 50 of this cost. You'd be setting aside 1,000 each year. Replacement cost funding is about 2.5 times that. Much more significant requirement from rates for each of the assets in the system that make up one of these. So at the halfway point, you're going to have 32,000, replacement cost funding 83. There is the no policy where you will have 0. And at the end, when it's time to replace this pipe, at $220,000, the depreciation policy, you will still be borrowing more than half the cost of that pipe to replace it, $134,000. Obviously, replacement cost, you borrow none. Obviously, you save nothing, you borrow all of it. So it's just to help understand the importance of this policy being built into the rate plan. So we're going to get into results for water. The water capital improvement plan. So to reiterate here, we very specifically keep separate your capital improvement funding picture from what funding meets your ongoing operating costs. That is people and customer service and billing and all of those things that are year-to-year costs. So one of the reasons is that when you borrow money, for example, the bonds that we're going to talk about in here, they're restricted to not be used for those other purposes. So what we're talking about for water is about $14 million of CIP over the period from 2017 to 2023. That's the total of the costs that need to be funded. Inside there is the funding source. So the green, we use green for the cash portion. So either reserves that the water utility has already accumulated up till this year, or the rate funded system reinvestment that we're showing as being set aside year to year is the cash, the green, that's available for these year-to-year CIP costs. The bigger 3 years, so you know what's in there, there's some large well and tank projects in 19, 22, and 23. So this cost, left side here, so we're talking about $5.5 million in 2022, about $4.8 million in 2023. So cost is the total, funding source is the different colors. So cash, as you can see, after $2.8 million of cash and rate funded system reinvestment, to complete the water CIP, you would need to borrow about $11.5 million in bonds. That completes the funding picture. These will eventually need to be repaid from rates. That's how it affects rates that we're going to talk about. So when we show you what your water rates look like, we like to provide for you some alternatives based on what we found from the sufficiency of your revenues. The first is that your current policy, depreciation net of debt principal, what the rate requirement is within that. Right now, you're not fully funding that policy just yet. So as I noted, that was a new policy going back to one of the rate studies, and it was phased in because the rate impact of doing it brand new fully was not acceptable. And so 2024 is when that's projected to be fully funded. That ranges from $80,000 to $260,000 that you'd be setting aside year to year. As we know that's essentially a dollar requirement from your rates. If you'll note, or remember, I noted that your bond holders have some requirements when you borrowed that are also built in. This is what's essentially driving the water rates. This won't be the case in sewer, but for water, to meet bond coverage from your covenants, that's going to be a primary driver, and we're going to talk about that graphically in a second. So we're also recommending that the city consider moving towards the more common approach to rate-funded system reinvestment currently, and that's fully funding depreciation year to year, not reducing it by debt principal repayment. Over the years, utilities are becoming more sensitive to this accumulating replacement liability in all of public infrastructure, but utilities are also sort of snowballing towards this replacement liability and building up to better reserve amounts. And so we're going to show you that in the rates as well. So the coverage, it's something helpful to understand since it's the requirement of the rates here. So your bondholders say that the revenue, you need to set your rates so that your revenue, less the operations and maintenance expenses, again that's people, customer service, billing, meter reading, that after you take out your operations and maintenance, that you'll have enough for one, of paying them back debt, and that you'll include a cushion. That doesn't go to them, you keep the cushion, but they want your revenue to be set at a level that ensures they'll get paid. And so your highest one is your 2013 bond. And so when we test your rates, we show that you need to set rates to meet that coverage factor. One of the debt repayment plus the cushion. Now your rate-funded system reinvestment often ends up being within that and it doesn't affect rates. In this case, we're going to talk about each of these pieces in here. This is where the whole picture comes together. The projection that you would borrow to fund your CIP, the impacts of that, we're going to build that up in here. The gray block on the bottom, this is the operations cost. So again, this is primarily staff. That's salaries and wages and benefits, that's power. Again, I said meter reading, it's those ongoing you're not building anything or replacing anything in that gray area. That's your ongoing year-to-year costs. So your O&M is the first block, it's sort of the priority. The next one is that you have, as I noted, existing outstanding bonds, and you have to repay those year to year. And so the blue that's the next box, and here's the dollars on the side, you can see, is the debt repayment. That's the next priority. And then we noted rate-funded system reinvestment, setting aside that reserve year to year to fund repair and replacement, so you're not borrowing. That's the orange, RFSR, rate-funded system reinvestment. It's a mouthful. So right now, your current rate is $29.24. Our dotted line across here is if you kept that rate at $29.24. And so one of the things that starts to change whether that line is enough, you can see it's in the first 2 years, that's sufficient. The red is new debt. So we talked about the blue is what you're already repaying. The red is in that CIP funding picture, we showed the gray that is you need to issue bonds to complete your CIP. So this is where the debt repayment on funding your CIP begins. And so you can see that that begins to grow as those significant projects in 19, 22, and 23. Your existing debt though, and debt is 20 or 30 year payments, you're actually coming to the end of one. And so your existing debt is paid off as of 2022, creates a little bit of room for the new debt that's being issued. What we're showing though is rather than this is essentially what we refer to as the cash requirement. You need to bring in enough revenue to meet these cash payments. The other is the bondholder's requirement. Here's with the cushion from coverage. So you can see that the requirement to meet coverage, this dotted grayish-brown line, begins to be higher than the cash requirement in 2021. And so you have to set rates sufficient to meet the bondholder coverage. So this black line is where we set revenue in a smooth set of rate increases versus jumping around these blocks, so that by the end of the forecast period, your rates are sufficient to meet the total obligation. So you can see that it's about a $3 rate increase, or the percentages are up here. So about 3 and then 350 near 4. And then once you're done building in a significant amount of that debt and you have the payoff, it goes down to 128, 132. So this rate plan meets your total cash obligations and the bond covenant requirements. Now, before I move on, the only thing that changes on the next slide, the only thing that changes, we talked about scenarios, is that we're recommending the city consider a more common and larger policy of setting aside rate-funded system reinvestment, the orange. And so the only thing that changes in the next slide is the orange, so you can see what happens to the rates at the end. So there's our orange, it's bigger. We're saying that you're going to set aside depreciation and not reduce it by debt principal. Those increases are more like 6% rather than 3%, so about $1 more per month to move towards that more current funding policy goal. And so everyone wants to know what everyone else is doing. This is the comparison you get that the current 2017 rate. So this would be comparable to these other blue blocks. These are 2017 rates for local comparables. And so in 2018, with that 10% rate increase, while that shows it would move to the right, we don't have the increases from the comparables. And so those aren't 2018 rates, but they may or may not be raising 3%, 10%, we don't know, but that's where it moves you. So moving on to sewer then. So the sewer, again, reiterating, we're starting with the capital funding plan. And again, funding sources for capital projects are restricted to capital purposes. And by capital, I mean it builds a facility or replaces a facility. It's not a part of paying salaries and wages, customer service, meter reading, power. They're restricted in purpose to only funding these purposes. And so as you can see, and we noted in the introductory slide, that this Basin 3 rehab is the one significant project that sewer has sort of been financially planning for. And we're going to talk about each of the colors here building up the funding picture. So you can see that the blue, notes down here, this is grants and contributed capital. And a little over half of that grant money is 100% secured and available and ready to be used. And then a portion of it is currently in a reappropriation process, and the city expects will be available for this project as well. The overriding comment is that grants are fairly rare to successfully capture at this point, and that the city has been very successful at seeking and securing grant money to fund this project. What that means is without this blue, the city would need to be borrowing that amount to complete the project and repay it through rates. If the city is not borrowing, there's no repayment and no effect on the rates for that portion. The green is the cash, again noting that available reserves and rate-funded system reinvestment up to this point makes some available. And then to complete the funding picture, another sort of difficult to get these days, low-cost state loan. So you'll notice this is not a gray revenue bond. This is an orange state loan, which means a much lower interest rate, doesn't have that coverage requirement that the water did when you're not using a bond. And so we're assuming about $1 million of that, though if some of these grants, if the not quite reappropriated yet ones didn't come through, there's an additional about $2 million of SRF loan also available to meet that gap. But this is the current assumptions for what you're seeing for the rates going forward in this presentation. The other note is there are other basin rehabilitation projects that are not included in this CIP. Again, because the city is pursuing this type of funding picture for those. And so we don't want to assume a bunch of borrowing to go with that. It's like my formatting went away in this round. Okay, but we can still figure out what's down there. So the sewer scenarios, Again, we have prepared alternatives to consider. The first one is that you would maintain the current policy of depreciation, net of debt principal for that savings for repair and replacements. You'd be continuing a phase-in. Again, you're not fully meeting that policy just yet because the last study said we're going to phase that in for the sake of rate impacts till 2022. Now, there's a lot of debt on the sewer side, so once you net out debt principal, you are making very little contribution towards that repair and replacement of $14,000 at the beginning and up to $120,000 by the end of the forecast. Again, another reason we're recommending going to the more current policy of fully funding depreciation. So you ensure year to year, you're at least getting something based on the original cost of that asset. Also recommending, again, that you phase it in. The rate impacts are just too significant to fully meet the policy in the first year. And so 10 years, over a decade to phase into that policy. That dollar amount looks like $160,000 up to, by the end of the forecast period, $1.2 million reserve contribution. And then, do we need to adjust the projector here so we can see the bottom that's being cut off? Yeah. This version seemed to...
It's cut off on your laptop too.
Oh, it is, isn't it? Everything's scrolling. Oh, that changes the slide. Well, I'm going to verbally
You can
provide
have
for you.
one of those.
You can
presentations
hear.
with it.
Oh, I've got it. I just, for those that don't have hard copies, but okay. So the bottom one, let me get there on my hard copy. So we were asked to prepare essentially a potential rate forecast, sort of a sensitivity analysis that says, what would it take to reduce rates by essentially 20% was what was picked. And if you were to reduce rates by 20% for sewer, the definition of this scenario is that there would be no rate-funded system reinvestment. You would not be setting anything aside for repair and replacements. And you would need to reduce O&M, which is primarily people, by $400,000 in 2018 up to $750,000 by 2023. That $750,000 would be 90% of your salaries and wages and benefits costs. So reducing staff by 90% essentially would be the where you would go to find a 20% cut in your O&M budget. And so that is one of the build-ups we're going to show you. So the first one, this one's based on your current policy of rate-funded system reinvestment. And so again, we're going to walk through these pieces here. So the gray, again, just reiterating the distinction, that's operating costs. That doesn't build or replace anything. That's your ongoing people, power, customer service, meter reading, and such. The blue, here's your debt repayment of existing outstanding debt in sewer. And then some of these sewer loans were low-cost loans that have specific reserve requirements that go along with it. This green, you spend a number of years and it kind of trails off here in 2022 that you have to set aside those reserve requirements. Excuse me. And then tiny little red here of new debt repayment, that's that low-cost state loan we saw on the CIP page that makes up the difference between grants. So small little new debt there. And then again, the orange is the rate-funded system reinvestment piece. And so O&M, debt, reserves. Again, the dotted line is your current revenue. And the good news is, currently your revenue is sufficient at the $97.96 sewer rate to meet your annual obligations through this entire forecast period. There's the possibility, and we were asked to just show the outcome of it, this is an estimate, sort of an unknown, that some of the operations costs could be, they call it capitalized. If they spend time on the grant project, indirect charge, yada yada, what it means is the grant can fund it, but this is sort of an unknown, and it's hard to say that it's a rate plan since it's sort of unknown yet, but we were asked to test the sensitivity. If that happened, could rates go down? So that's why you're seeing here that if in fact the estimated $350,000 of potential capitalized staff time were to be were to be funded by the grant, in 2018, rates could go down by about $11. What would happen though is in the next year that grant is not active, nothing's being capitalized, and you go back to meeting your ongoing level of requirement. So rates go back up, first $7 and then over $4 before changing. So the least risk, most reasonable approach in this case is to leave rates unchanged at the 97, 96. For if you were to move towards the more current repair and replacement savings policy based on depreciation, the only thing, just like in water, that changes here is that the orange, which is that reserve, gets bigger. And what that means is you're borrowing less in the future for your repair and replacement. There's more of that green reserve on the CIP page rather than borrowing the gray when you have this. And so the only difference here is the orange. You still have your operating costs, your debt repayment, that reserve requirement from the debt, and then our orange is growing. So what that means is we're now saying revenues would not be sufficient by 2019, and you would be raising rates by 7, 7.5, and then 4, 4.5, and up to $5 by the end to get to that funding picture. And so this sensitivity analysis of what it would look like if you were able to find and reduce costs in your O&M, staff and such by $400,000 up to $750,000 by the end of the period. And for information, your O&M budget right now, operations and maintenance is what that means. Operations budget is $2.5 million. So you can see that's a significant piece of that. And again, it's 90% of the staff costs. You would have no rate funded system reinvestment. There's no orange there. And so you can see that that assumption that somehow that reduction is made, and then your debt repayment is unchanged. So the only thing that changes is a smaller gray block here for the operations. And so that's your 20% reduction going out. And that's a $20 per month because your sewer rate is essentially about $100. So it's about 20% is $20 reduction. Again, so checking on the comparable situation here, which this is a little bit difficult because we're showing a decrease in the first year and then it goes back up for 2 years. And so again, in your comparables, we don't know what they're doing the next year. But let's look at your current. So Shelton's 2017 current is the 97.96. I guess to the right, after you've decreased a year and gone back up one of the 2 years, you're at 101.62. To the left, if you're doing the depreciation policy in 18, it's down to 94 and then up to 94. A lot going on here that you can look at in more detail on your own. The reduction spot here would bring you down essentially a position to 78.37 if you could find a way to reduce costs in that manner that we discussed. And so one of the things we want to look at, this is not probably the best comparison in terms of comparable sewer situation. What we decided to look at is the most significant element driving your current rate level is that you have a recent sewer treatment upgrade. There are other utilities, also small-sized cities, who have done recent treatment plant upgrades, and it's a matter of time for the other ones. So when you compare, that puts you at the far left-hand side of the spectrum. Duval at 72, and then you've got Kashmir, Carnation, North Bend, and Tenino, and they're not done on their rate plan yet that's making significant increases for that treatment plant. We also have another small client that's at 52 right now and is about to be proposed 3 years of 35% rate increases, which would put them at the far right hand here. So the significant driver of your sewer rates is the recent treatment upgrade, which when you come due, and that's essentially the $100 sewer rate that's happening for small cities. And so looking at the last comparison here, combined single family bill, where we say we're going to put the blue is your water on the bottom in each of the scenarios, and the green is the sewer. We thought, perhaps showing a relatively low water rate in combination with the sewer is really the financial impact to a water and sewer customer. They're getting the lower water rate and a higher sewer rate. Yes, you're still to the right, but less spiky compared to these locals that don't have recent sewer treatment upgrades. So this is where we summarize, because this is a lot of material. It's a complex, utilities are complex, they're long-lived asset systems you're managing. And so for water, looking back, the annual rate increases of 10%, that wasn't till the end, that was till 2021, meet both your cash and, as you remember, your bond covenant. It's driven by the bond coverage obligation through 2021. And then after that, it depends on which of the rate-funded system reinvestment plans the city would choose. The current policy would be 3% for the last 2 years, and an updated policy of depreciation funding would be 6% in the last 2 years. And then sewer, under the existing policy target, your current levels are sufficient to meet cash and bond coverage for the whole period. They don't require an adjustment. There's the potential for some of your O&M being partially funded by the grant in 18, but that's an estimate and an unknown. And so the recommendation there is to maintain rates at their current level. And then just, can't see it, but the reduction analysis, again, would require reducing your operating costs, which is, again, people and power and customer service and meter reading, ongoing non-facility related costs from 400,000 to 750,000 by the end of the period, and that 750,000 is 90% of your budget for people. And so that was what does that mean if we did that? And so with that, I guess we can take questions on, does that work? Okay.
Is not using growth normal when you do a study like this?
Well, it depends on the city's expectation for growth. And in this case, it's specific to that those basin rehabilitation projects are not included. They create capacity in the system to serve new growth. Right now, the city's bumping up against a capacity issue. And so if we were to include those projects, then we would include the growth that could connect based on that new capacity. If we don't include them, essentially growth couldn't continue.
And this, I guess, is a question for the city folk. How do you reconcile not including those basin projects and not planning any growth with the comprehensive plan, which prescribes a level of growth that we really have very little to say about? I mean, the comp plan assumes we will grow, and you have to have a capital facilities element and funding. And I don't know how you reconcile a utility rate model based on no growth and a comprehensive plan that must assume growth.
So I think what we can assume through your scenario is we're assuming that the growth is going to come from Shelton Hills, which would not go to the main treatment plant. It would go, which we're bumping up some capacity issues there. It would go to the satellite plant, and the satellite plant would need some upgrades to it. So I think that's how we are addressing that growth projection that we've got, is that it comes more from the Shelton Hills area that would be diverted to the satellite plant.
It may have changed, but my memory of the numbers is that there's a certain portion of that growth that is assigned to the city of Shelton. I could be wrong, but there's a UGA component and a city component.
Well, Shelton Hills is in the city limits.
No, it isn't. It's UGA, isn't it?
Shelton Hills?
Is it in the UGA? I mean, is it in the city limits?
Maybe Mark can answer.
It's annexed.
Yeah.
It's annexed in the city. There is a percentage.
Okay.
There is a percentage for infill growth. I can't quote that off the top of my head, but it certainly isn't the amount of growth that we see in Shelton Hills or Goldsboro Heights over the 20-year span of the comprehensive plan.
My apologies. I didn't realize the Shelton Hills area was in city limits. Okay.
Which that is projected to go to the satellite plant at this point.
Okay.
Originally, in the first few concepts that we had from Shelton Hills, it was going to, the first few phases, phase one or phase, I think it was just phase one, was going to be going to the main plant. We reassessed that, and we're going to suggest that all of it goes to the satellite plant at this point.
Are water and sewer hookup fees in this study also selling our sewer services seems to be lucrative, or is that revenue in this study?
So the hookup fees or capital connection fees are paid when you have a new customer connect. So without the growth assumption, there isn't any revenue currently assumed in there. And part of it is that we're trying to be reasonably conservative. We don't want to tell you your sewer rates are sufficient and have had growth in there, and then the growth doesn't happen, and then, oh, they weren't sufficient. So we try to be what the reasonable expectation is, but on the conservative side. So adding growth only makes the picture look rosier than it might be.
Okay, the sewer selling? The revenue from selling our sewer services to the Squaxins, to the county?
Talking about taking the biosolids?
Yes.
It's included.
It's included?
Looks like your assumptions for your forecasts are based on past experience of whatever. But like you were saying, your population growth is assuming nothing. There's, I can tell, last several years the city has grown like maybe 1% a year. That can be argued, but suppose that's true. Can you do something like, you wouldn't necessarily just plug in the growth and the revenue. You would say, okay, what's the additional strain on the system and the incremental expense? Could you do something like that? And another question, what percentage growth do you feel is such that you can absorb without, under the current capacity? I mean, it sounds like you're saying they're close. I'm just wondering what percent growth could be absorbed with the current capacity.
Right now, we're running at a capacity, but the only way that we're gaining capacity is with basin projects because of our I&I. When we upgraded the treatment plant, our capacities for flow didn't really increase that much. They did for BOD, which is biochemical oxygen demand, and that's just your pounds of that coming in, your waste coming in. So until we get the basin projects done and see what that does to our flow, that's what's really going to drive our capacity.
Do you know how much growth can happen before we actually bump up against that capacity?
We've pushed it to almost, we averaged a monthly average. Our highest one was over 4 million, and we're allowed 4.4. So we don't have a lot of room.
So about, I don't know, 90% capacity right now.
Yeah.
There's some sort of cushion you're required to meet, like, you can go up to 90%, you can't go up to 95, or can you go all the way up to full capacity, or
you can go to full capacity, but most treatment plants are scheduled to hit redesign about 85. But what ours is we're at 95% capacity for the flow, but for the biological process, we're not. We've gained capacity at that.
So it sounds like
basically we have to contain the I&I to gain capacity.
Well, it sounds like once the basin 3 is installed, that will increase the overall capacity. Is that a true statement?
If basin 3, as much as it captures, we will gain.
Okay.
So I&I really is just the groundwater that we're getting that's infiltrating into our pipes at this point, which really acts as sewage that is ending up at the treatment plant. And to answer your second question, I think to talk about how much capacity we would actually bump up to, I think that's a policy question for your electeds to really what the exposure is of if we get to 100%. Do we run the risk of something happening where we are running up against a DOE requirement?
Well, that was my question. I don't know if it sounds like there's not a rule out there that says, oh, you can't go to 100, you have to stop at 95 or whatever. I guess my core question is, after basin 3 is put in, you're going to have some sort of capacity. would that be enough to, say, absorb a 1% organic growth that it appears Shelton's going through, you know, the next 2 years? Would it be sufficient to do that?
You can't really project it that way because when you have a I&I situation, flood, as much rainwater as we had, our flows increased from about 1.2 to over 2 to 3 to 4 as the winter goes on. So you can't really judge that because it's actually backing up into our system. So we've done rehab projects on Basin 1 and Basin 2 and Neelan pump station. And what that's actually done is stopped it backing up in the system and actually surcharging out the manholes. So in order to measure that, you can measure it, but if it rains harder one year than the next, I mean,
It's really difficult for us to rate the past basins that we've done also, because as Brent mentioned, I'm sure everybody remembers, we used to have surcharging manholes. You used to see Neelan Park completely fill up with sewage. That would have originally, well, if we had capacity at the plant, that would have been going to the plant. By doing these I&I projects that we are doing, you've reduced all of that you're losing. So you're actually picking that up, keeping it into the system. So it's hard to really, for Brent to say, this is how much we've actually captured with each basin project until we actually have gotten now that under control. So we should have a better idea with Basin 3 moving forward.
Sounds like you'd be better able to answer my questions maybe later. Once you get that information.
2 years from now when we finish Basin 3, we'll have a better idea.
Right. But my point is, you can't just say, well, we're not going to have any growth. It's like, suppose Shelton does grow 1% a year for the next several years. Are you thinking, well, we didn't think of that because we assumed no growth. Shouldn't there be some, well, what do we have to do if that does happen? Kind of thing. That's basically my core question. Maybe you do run up against capacity. Maybe you don't. I don't know. That's sort of my question. And maybe you don't know for 2 years after Basin 3's in.
Then we would have to go back to the commission and propose new capital infrastructure.
Right, but based on those demographics, you're the guys that will be able to say, well, that'll hit against our capacity. It's over capacity, therefore we have to do this. Maybe it's under capacity after Basin 3. I don't know. That's just the information. I'm not talking necessarily about policy, but it sounds like Craig's saying, no, wait until Basin 3's in. We'll know better what those numbers might look like then, what capacity is in. That sounds like what you're telling me, so sorry to take so much time.
Go ahead.
On both your water and sewer bar graphs for the 7-year projections, both of them were exactly the same. You showed a flat O&M monetary number through across the board. Do you realistically think that as equipment gets older, O&M costs are not going to be going up as equipment gets older?
The O&M is going up by 1.5% each year. So that first assumption slide we talked about, anything that, well, I'm going to go back to it. Anything that's general in your budget, cost inflation is going up by 1.5%. And then wages and benefits have separate rates. In the CIP where you're doing either building or replacing things, this is based on a construction type of index rather than general cost inflation, and it's recognizing 3% year to year for capital related costs going up. So those graphs, it's the scale that you're seeing on a PowerPoint slide, that gray is actually going up. It's just hard to tell on the scale.
But 3%.
John does bring up a very good point though. The plant has just gotten to a point where we're outside the warranty period. It's not a new plant anymore. And we do have things that just this year we've had 100,000 pumps go down. So within Front Street Lift Station and the main plant, just in the last 6 months, we've had about $200,000 worth of pumps that we've had to replace. So it is a very good point that we do recognize, and we're trying to work through that with some other reductions to try and mitigate that somewhat.
Is that in the gray O&M or is that in the repair and replacement reserve?
So I guess the question is, and I don't have the detail of the CIP, is there like an ongoing R&R program in the CIP that we have? No, okay. So you're putting it in the budget, which is the gray. Okay.
So I've always thought the water portion of our bill was fair. Now we're talking raising it 40%. So we've got water lines running down John's Prairie, potential growth. If they come in, we've got Room River Hotel coming in. If we start getting some of this growth, can we look at these rates again and maybe take them back down if we increase customers, big customers?
Yeah, I think that the commission's made it pretty clear that they want the rates to be as low as possible and still maintain stability and sustainability with our financial picture. So I think that's something that I know the mayor mentions to me probably 5 times.
3 times. I brought to the commission several times specific suggestions about rate structure. A basic health and sanitation rate, an ongoing charge for water meters that are turned off that maintain system. And I was talking to our consultants about that, and she said that is part of a rate structure study, that this is not rate structure. This assumes, I guess, everybody pays the same. And I'm wondering if you're planning a rate structure that might look at low-income categories, that might look at basic health and sanitation rate, that might look at some way to differentiate between people who can afford the rates and people who can't. And apparently that takes another study.
This is the Can We Pay Our Bills study.
Yeah.
That's a question for the commission, but at this point, we don't have a plan to commission other stuff.
Because I know every time I've talked to you about these things, you said, oh, we're doing a water rates study. And it doesn't cover the things I was talking to you about.
Yeah, I think that asking if we're going to lower the amount that people pay for a certain category also takes into account that you have to have other people that are going to pay more.
Oh, I know
and
that.
I think that that's a bigger conversation in this.
I'll just interject on this because I think this is an important point that we should be discussing as we're talking about more affordable housing and lower income housing. But in the studies that I have done regarding that, those type of programs have to be subsidized from another pot of money if we're only able to charge rates based on what it costs us. Then in that case, we may be looking at making some changes through our general fund that would subsidize additional rates for low income. And then we get into a whole measure of are we using public funds fairly or not? So it is a big question. It is a really big question.
But there are other cities that have
There are.
very low rates for a very limited amount of water that allows people to essentially wash their hands and use the toilet.
And those have, like Brian said, they have other ratepayers that are paying higher rates, or they have specific programs to enable them to offer lower, to offset the actual costs to the system.
And I'm well aware some of us would be paying higher rates for that.
I will just interject in my involvement in this sewer basin issue, that I spent 5 years negotiating with state agencies and the governor and our legislators, and I fought along with Craig Gregory in getting that $6.whatever million, and we are still fighting for more grant money. My number one reason for doing that was to attempt to lower the sewer rates that our people are paying. And I hope that we can maybe make a compromised situation where we don't stop saving money for future expansion, and that we do all of the things necessary. But my whole number one goal has been to attempt to bring our rate a little closer to the $50, $60 mark rather than the $100 mark. So we've done a great thing. I mean, that's an amazing thing that we did, and getting that much grant money, and as long as I'm here, I will still try and do that, but here's this kind of sad thing, is basic everyday wages are going down or staying the same. And cost to run government, I'm just saying, folks, rising 10% a year when people's wages are the same or they're going down. I mean, we have, and I don't know the answer, because you've got to have the infrastructure, you got to follow the law, you got to put in all these things, but that is a issue that is not easily overcome, because after battling for that 6 point whatever million, for a reason to possibly lower these sewer rates, looks like we get a little 1 year reprieve, but the gobbling machine is right there to go 10% a year and whatnot for forever. And it's just, I've done the best I could to try. And so we'll see where we go on this. I do know that the question we had a little earlier was about our future basins, why there's no money set aside. It was a kind of a negotiation that past administration and the Department of Ecology and myself had, that look at, we're going to get basins free, we're going to get through this. We thought, that was old staff, not the current staff, we thought we could absorb the new ones and fight for grant money, and that we would not have to borrow a lot of money to do that, because the basin free was at that point supposedly one of the last major ones. And so this commission as a whole has continued to stay true to that, and we're going to get basin free done. And after that, though, it's kind of like, okay, what are you going to throw at me next? You know, it is not an easy job to do this stuff. And I really know that if we can get a cut to our people this time, you know, I understand it's got to come back, but at the moment, we have people that are very struggling in our community to pay these rates, especially the sewer rate, and that's my whole intent. So I do appreciate the study, and I'm writing notes on every page.
I was wondering if you could take a moment to talk just a little bit more about, you touched briefly on it in your presentation, about different scenarios and our current policy versus our funding for depreciation, and that's a newer model that a lot of cities are using as opposed to the model that we currently use. Could you explain a little bit more about that?
Yes, so when we were first reviewing the city's rates years ago, I guess it's been 7 years since the water, at that time, on the spectrum of what we set aside and what we recommend to utilities and the balance of rate impacts versus meeting that funding, this current policy that says your annual depreciation, and really it's a conceptual policy, so it takes a minute to unpack. Each year you're going to set aside equal to the use of the asset, the 1 year of use of the asset based on original costs. So we're not even talking about that replacement cost. So it's already going to be behind the ball. We know that from this slide. But then we say there's a lot of RCW in rate setting that says they should be equitable. And so one of the concepts to sort of back that out was that when you make your debt payment on facilities that you're paying for right now, your utility customers are paying for it through that debt. So it gets reduced by the debt. Just a really high rate concept thing that was a way to kind of move towards when there were no policies. Utilities just weren't setting anything aside. Now, there has been a real shift just nationwide in terms of funding public infrastructure, that we're running into bridges falling apart and roads and this backup of unfunded liability. And utilities are a part of that picture. Folks are looking at, we have millions of dollars of assets that are coming due for replacement and nobody's setting anything aside. And so the shift has been, depreciation is sort of the at least right now. So what happened, and I showed you on one of the slides, in sewer you have so much outstanding debt that the debt principal payment almost outstrips your principal or your depreciation, and there's barely any contribution happening. And so already, and I can feel that tension of the affordability issue, but if you're snowballing into a future reliance on borrowing and higher long-term rates, the more you put off a repair replacement funding picture. It's a bit of dire nationwide issue that people are trying to communicate. So I know the sensitivity here is affordability of rates. I know that, but I would be not doing my job if I didn't recommend that you strongly consider prioritizing and phasing in over a decade, 10 years, towards this depreciation policy that you'll still be, when it comes time to replace assets, borrowing a significant amount, but at your current policy, you just are going to come due for a lot of borrowing for repair and replacement.
Can we go back to the sewer graphic with the dotted lines and all that?
Oh, that's water.
And then you have the other one, if you raise rates, then you include the pre-funding of the future infrastructure. Is that a separate one?
This one's
that's in there, okay. My question is, could you do something, like, the dotted line is if you freeze rates.
Yes.
And apparently, if you do that, you're not pre-funding future infrastructure. Is that a true statement?
Not much, just a tiny bit of work.
Yeah, it looks like a little bit. But my question is, LPAT, and I haven't looked at NOLA's bond schedule for a while, but I'm presuming out past the 6 or 7 years or whatever, the current bond debt is going to start to fall off and be paid off in pieces. Could you do something like say, look, we don't want to raise rates, we're okay for now, we can handle our debt and the operating costs, but in the future, as these debts fall off, can we use the difference to start funding these pre-funding? Is that something that could be looked at?
I would answer that in 2 ways. One is that it's already being spread over a decade, so when that type of thing happens, usually use it to sort of catch up further along your phase-in. But the other, it's just the impact. You can do whatever you do, but what happens is you start this out here, and it results in significantly less funding when it started later in the game. That's just the outcome of that.
Right. But still, you're gonna borrow less than you would have had you not done anything.
The net more in any case.
I get that part.
Yes.
Another thing to remember here is nobody's really blaming anybody specifically about certain things. The city of Shelton has its history in its past. Other cities have those. I know of cities in Washington State that literally are saving for their new sewage treatment plant. And they're up to like 20 or 30 million. And they've got a projected date. And they've got low rates, low sewer and water rates now. But they started this 10 or 20 years ago before they didn't need any sewage. So if you start in the beginning, we're in the middle of big increases and stuff right here. But there is, if you follow your plan diligently, trust me, the rates will not be as high and you can get there. But once you're already there and you're trying to kind of, so I think it's, in a way I look at it, it's balancing a lot of this stuff. You kind of got to respect the citizens that are paying $100 a month. And then you got to kind of respect the fact that if we don't pay some and more, we're not going to build those reserves. So we got to balance between those two. And that's what we are talking about and thinking about doing. And if we started 100 years ago, we'd have that next $100 million sitting in the bank ready to go for the brand new sewage treatment plant. But that's not where we are. So. Some cities that are saving for all that stuff. I mean, there are some cities that aren't.
I didn't mention this time, there's some that are aggressively doing on the replacement cost base end of the spectrum where they're setting aside so that they can fully cash fund all of their repair and replacements. As I showed you, depreciation falls short. It's a significant rate impact, but they're biting the bullet.
Would that be fair to say those are cities that may be better in a better economic state?
The one I'm thinking of is a solid economy. So
solid economy, yeah.
It's always N=1. Your situation is unique to your city.
You are unique.
Size and affordability and starting place.
I just wanted to ask, if the decision was made to build up reserves, is there a mechanism to ensure that that money stays in reserve for these projects and is not used for something else? Like when there's a shortfall someplace else?
I can guarantee it.
I was going to say the only thing that it could go to that wouldn't be capital would be operations. if you're not increasing rates enough to meet your operations. So if you fell behind on your rate increases, you would start to eat into reserves. And so maintaining a policy for sufficient rates is the way to ensure that.
One of the puzzle pieces to keep in mind too there is that when you're looking at water rates versus sewer rates, each one of those functions as a separate entity or a separate business. So we can't intermingle that money. So even if we had strong revenue in one of those and had strong reserves, we are not allowed to push that over to another fund. We can't share those. And to address your investments question, we do track very carefully restricted money, committed money, and those dollars are placed into investment accounts. And to go back to Marilyn's question, you talked a little bit about a concern for looking for alternatives for lower rates. And one of the balancing acts that we have to deal with is balancing individual customers' needs for lower rates versus the overall cost of operating the utility. And when we look at the cost of operating the utility, that's a fairly stable cost as opposed to revenue that can go up and down with utilization. So that's part of the balancing act we have to consider when we're looking at establishing the rates.
And I was asking mostly in the context of, again, the comprehensive plan, because the housing element by law has to make adequate provisions for affordable housing for all economic segments of the community. And affordability is based on 30% of income that goes not only for the box people live in, but for essential utilities. And so utilities are a critical part of affordability, and it's not $100 because when you add water and sewer, it comes up to 126. When you're talking about that for simply utilities, and Mayor, you mentioned in a public meeting that we needed, and I agree, $300 and $400 and $500 rental units in the city, which we don't have. The utilities really push that affordability of housing. And I'm looking at that mandate that says you must make adequate provisions for, and how the city plans to do that in the comprehensive plan when utilities are so high. That's my context. So it's never just one window.
I keep hearing nomenclature to saying Basin 3 is the last basin. We have a degree from the state to continue our I&I. And past Basin 3, you have 3 more basins, 2 of which are the largest basins in town. Do we have something in writing from the state that they've suspended that order?
All I can say is conversations I was involved in, and because it's past staff, the comment I heard in the presence of the director of the Department of Ecology, so we're talking about pretty high up the food chain, the term Basin 3 was our last major basin.
Do you have that in writing?
No, I do not. And so I'm trying to answer you something. So I was there in that conversation. I don't know if anybody else in this room had heard a term like that. I understand there are other basins, but it was discussed that we believe that we could do those basins without borrowing massive amounts of money if we could. Did you guys remember hearing anything like that? I mean, you can say no, but...
I don't think I was in that.
Okay, you weren't here.
I do remember hearing in a report that city staff was going to do the work for Basin 5 itself, that we were going to absorb that in the natural operation of, it may have been before your time, but I'm sure that was...
That's not possible.
Okay. A little bit of clarification might be here, that because of the infiltration, the I&I issue with Basin 3, is there more of an issue with the I&I on Basin 3 than there would be on the future basins we're doing?
It's definitely in one of the wetter areas,
Okay.
in the lower areas. of town.
So maybe the conversation was based upon that we would be under a, we call a moratorium, or that we have to get this done right now because of that I&I issue. The other basins were not, I don't think, as major of a concern with the Department of Ecology. Now, that's just what I had in conversations, and that my goal is hit Basin 3, and then my goal, if I'm here, is to continue to hit the next one and keep hitting at them and do the best we can. But Basin 3 appears to have a more major I&I problem. Maybe that's what the conversation was framed about when we talked about the last of the major water issue ones, that it was the last of that. But anyway, that's the best I can say. So if you got a court order or something, then we got to take a look at it.
As Basin 3 is one of the wetter ones, it is also one of the smaller ones also. Basin 7, which is basically Mountain View area, I think what John's alluding to is you've got a very large area there that maybe the groundwater is not quite as high, but you've also got some very deep sewers up in that area, and it's a very large Basin 6, which is Angleside, is also a very vast area for a sewer basin. And then we've got 4, which is a pretty small one. But yeah, you've got some major basin rehab projects on the horizon. We don't know when those are, but Brent and I have had extensive conversations about when we would need to do those. And really at this point, we're trying to get, as the mayor said, Basin 3 funded and get through that one before we start to look at those broader ones.
It's the last of the downtown basins.
Where is Basin 4?
It is attached to Basin 5, so basically it's
Basin Street.
if you're familiar with the road that leads down to the treatment plant, it would be south of that on the, just a chunk east of Olympic Highway South.
So all of these areas, the systems there are getting pretty outdated. They've been in place for a number of years.
Correct.
So you don't know, you don't have a time schedule when you're going to start considering replacing those. What do you think is a time schedule for? 20 years out?
We have a cleaning and camera program.
Mm-hmm.
So we've just recently done some major upgrades to our camera vans so we can go out and clean and camera those basins, and that's what we're kind of going to develop a plan on, which ones we find the most leaking in and bad shape of pipe.
But given that those are old areas too, they're not new developments.
I don't think they're 20 years out.
No, I don't think so either. And we're looking at here trying to pay back what we've got already established. Hopefully 3 will get done, and that's 10 years, 7 years, I don't know, something.
Well, and that's sort of when the mayor says that he was hoping to lower rates with getting that plan. What it really did is it stopped them from increasing a lot more than they had to. And that was the savings in that also. It's not, maybe it's not a great big lowering of the rates, but it's at least saying there's 6 million or whatever was grant funded that we didn't have to pay back and make our rate. I mean, that rate study would be a lot different with 6 million more worth of debt added to it.
So I had another question about that. Payne had built enough of funds so that we can do the projects. We're not enough in the game for those other basins that we're not going to have time to build up any reserves to pay for future projects, or at least a lot. Is that correct?
It has to do with what that horizon, so under 20 years, you're not going to, you're right, you're not going to have a significant cash contribution to it. Yes, whatever you collect will reduce the borrowing load, but no, this will not cash fund.
So if if we do make a real concerted effort to do that, we will be seeing the benefit of that maybe in the projects that we have to do in 20 years, or is 20 years even adequate to fund in a viable number?
So the question you asked was, would reserving for this pipe, say in year 1, be able to fund a pipe that needs to be replaced in year 2 that is not this pipe? So that's essentially what that question was. And the funds can go to either. If you're saving for repair and replacement, you can use it near term for these other pipes that are, coming due right here. But anything that's not is becoming a part of a year 1 picture to get to at least this number, the 84. But the more you use it for ones that you had not been reserving for, the more you eat into even the 84, which is why the policy is so important.
I see that. So the cities that have been able to save considerable amounts of money, they have raised their rates considerably in order to fund that pot of money?
To do this policy?
Yeah.
Well, it varies by utility, so it's the starting point, which are various.
So if you set as a goal, we know that in 2030 we're going to have to start on this project, then you would project out as well as you could how much money you would need to save specifically for that project and adjust the rates accordingly?
That would be an alternative to this. This says that all of your facilities, they are all moving towards it. So there is a project for everything in your system that's going to come due. Now, some utilities have a specific project, like we heard about, treatment plant. We're going to save for that. We specifically, and that's different than this. That's for, and you'd either do them together or one or the other.
So it's just your regular savings plan or your vacation fund?
Well, the first one, not the second one.
Okay, thank you. That cleared that up for me. Thank you.
In the case I was talking about, the city in Eastern Washington, they pretty much started a simple little city, and they've always had that in place. Okay, good financial planning in the beginning produces successful results later on. So, not to blame anybody for anything, but we are in the middle of all this stuff, trying to kind of survive. And so it's a good lesson to our young people. Start in high school with your savings plan, and you'll have something when you're older. So, and we are trying to figure out, because for us to raise our rates, we're just trying to figure out what the people can absorb here, And so, but I'm sure that we will come up with an answer and a compromise, and that will be the best that we can do with what we have.
Is our O&M of $1.5 million for water and $2.5 million for sewer what you're seeing out there for a system our size?
So there aren't a lot of studies on benchmarking. That's the word I'm looking for. Benchmarking studies that say, sometimes we do that as part of a project, but the caution always goes back to N=1. Do they have a recent treatment plant upgrade? So staff versus, budget versus, size of the city population. It's really hard to have apples to apples. And so in terms of our exposure to the operations, what you're seeing here is kind of the level that we're helping most cities. So we're not down in the operational efficiency weeds as much, so I can't help with that.
I think it would be important for Brent and Brian to share where their actual staffing levels are at right now in comparison to maybe where they should be and where the state has recommended they be.
Yeah, for mine, we have 4 level 3 and above operators. We have 1 operator in training, and that's to run the $40 million new plant and the satellite plant. And there's also 1 collections employee running the whole biosolids building that we create fertilizer at. And I'm not even sure how many are in collections, because that's on the storm and collection side. But I
believe there's 2.
There's 2 maintenance workers in that one. The state would like to see probably 2 to 3 more operators and 1 to 2 more actual maintenance workers at the plants to run them. So we have been told repeatedly that we're one of the lowest staffed plants for our size. So, and that was, 2 years ago, we've been able to get operators internally to pass these tests. But before then, we put out applications for operators. I believe that we got 14 back. 2 were qualified, but not available at the time. So that's what we got for staffing. The second time we went out, I'm not sure that we had one qualified applicant actually apply or send in a resume. So getting wastewater treatment plant operators is not exactly an easy thing, but luckily we've been able to set a program up and train in-house to do that. So.
Yeah, I agree along with Brent. I think as far as the size of the city of Shelton and the amount of operators we have, there's myself, there's an assistant crew lead below me, and then there is a water quality and cross-connection control specialist in our department. So that being 3, any additional work, any hands that we need outside of that are non-operator positions out of a maintenance pool. So as far as certified operators, like I said, there's 3. We have more infrastructure now to maintain with the new Upper Mountain View Zone, pressure zone and tank, the water line going out to Johns Prairie and whatnot, and just that many more hydrants and water lines and miles of pipe that you got to maintain, locate, and daily operational duties, chlorination and whatnot, and just customer complaints and water quality issues and whatnot.
So passing off the sewer and water hookups to private people kind of helped you out a little bit, staff-wise?
I haven't seen it take effect just yet. We're still doing a few of them, but I think that will help with the operations, yeah, in the future.
Sewer was already like that, so the change reason was just the water tanks.
So based on those 2 assumptions, where are you going to cut staff to get it down 20%?
It's gonna be just Brent working part-time.
I don't hear an answer.
Well, it didn't show 20%. It didn't show that we could do that for 1 year and then raise it back up 8%, 4%.
You go to, there is a slide with that.
Huh? Yeah. Well, yeah. Yeah.
We have a formulated plan for that scenario.
This is a facts finding position.
So, on the sewer side, if we didn't do any reduction, just left it as it is, we're pretty good, and we're actually going to build a little bit from there.
So.
Without reducing, without that 11%.
Yes, and again, I wanted to make sure that it was clear, this is sort of an estimate that because that's next year and you're setting rates for next year, I recommend strongly that you maintain your current rate levels rather than take the decrease because that's not a known number.
So if that was gone, then we could be back to a flat line.
The flat line is your sufficient, and right there, even by the end, it's sufficient, so.
I think one of the things that was attractive to me about that too is that we're doing a fair jump, but it would prevent us from going up a larger amount for the rate increases to follow the dividend increase.
I meant no jump. That 11% was gone. What happens to that 8%?
So
If
everything's
that minus
zero.
was gone.
If you just ignore this dip and this unknown here that we're testing out, this is this one's 97, 96, then this is 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. Straight flat line, no adjustment, current rates would be sufficient.
Okay, so I get it.
So in 2018, the dip in the rate there, the distance between the point and the dotted line, that money could be used to put into the future infrastructure fund, right?
So yes, if this was realized, if you held rates
Right.
and said, we don't know what this is gonna be, and there was some capitalization that happened, we don't know what it is, then you would have that in reserves. That would become orange, that goes towards future.
I think one thing, like the dotted line assumes the 97, 96 kind of stays where it is for, I haven't looked at the schedule for a while, but there are increases scheduled that are actually in law, if I'm not mistaken. I can't remember if the remaining increases are 15 or 20%, but suppose it's 20%. If you do this, if you freeze the rates, then you could make an argument, yes, we have reduced the rates 20%. Because if we don't do anything, they're going to be 20% higher within 3 or 4 years, or 15, whatever the number is.
I think what's very important with that dip that we haven't talked about, we did talk about whether that was actually going to be realized or not, but we do have to understand that the bid climate right now for large infrastructure projects is going through the roof. And we projected, we know somewhat where that's going to end up, but we haven't gotten any bids or haven't gone to a formal bid for Basin 3, so we don't actually know how much that project's actually going to cost us. So to rely on what might be some savings to generate a rate decrease at this point, I think would be very difficult.
Is that a one-off? Is that just potentially going to happen in 2018, or can that happen in future years? Whatever's causing the reduction in 2018.
Oh, if it were gonna happen, it's only related to those grants.
So
It's something you can
it's a
charge
one-off.
to grants. It's
Okay.
a one-off for sure, and maybe a not.
Okay, yeah, it may not even happen.
Yeah.
I get it, thanks.
Other questions we can answer? Well, this information is available on our website, Facebook page, I think also out on Twitter, so if you want to take a look at this, you can certainly download it. And then we also presented this at the commission meeting today, so on our YouTube account tomorrow, you'll see this presentation that was done to the commission earlier today. We want to thank you for coming out. We also have a meeting in this building on Wednesday to talk about the Downtown Connector Project, which is Alder Street and Olympic Highway North. We're open to see you again Wednesday at 6 o'clock. Thank you very much.